Hello, Stephen Schaub here, leader of the FIGITAL Revolution 2.0 here on YouTube, and today we are here at the holy shrine of digital cinema cameras. We're going to take a look at a SONY FX3, a SONY FX6, two really great, entry-level / professional level motion picture cameras, and we're going to look at it towards the industry standard and super high-end production, the RED Raptor, which is an 8K cinema camera and the first 8K camera capable of doing 120 frames per second in 8K. So let's start out with the FX3 and the FX6. These two cameras are more similar than they're different. The FX3 really is a run and gun camera. It's a single operator camera as well. You don't need a focus puller or a camera operator. It really, one person can do the whole thing. These cameras, if you look at the specifications between the FX3 and the FX6, they're almost the same. There are subtle differences. This one has a built-in ND filter. This one does not. This one has a touch more resolution and a touch higher capability of white balance adjustment. But once again, they're very similar cameras to the extent that they're really interchangeable. I don't know if you can really see it on screen, but it's a significantly bigger camera. It's a heavier camera. This is a much lighter system. As a single camera operator, shooter, doing documentary, this is the camera that I want to have for, oh, Eve's moving the candle. Thank you, Eve. That I would have as a single shooter. If you look at that compared to the RED Raptor 8K camera, it's just a much bigger camera. This is a multi-operator camera. You've really got 2 or 3 people running the camera. That's not to say you can't use it, by yourself, but it is a just bigger, much heavier camera platform, and it's a much more expensive system, as you can imagine. You can buy an awful lot of these for what one of these costs. The autofocus isn't bad, but it isn't up to par with what the Sony can do. So the RED has better color. The RED also has a better interface. What I dislike about Sony cameras, and I've always disliked this about them, is their menu system. They're maddening. It's menus within sub-menus within menus. This is a much simpler platform to work on, but as you can imagine, the file sizes from an 8K camera are massive. We're going to take a look at side-by-side videos, and you're going to be able to make up your mind for yourself as to which look you like. So let's get right to it. All right, so here you can see our setup. This was the Raptor next to the FX3, and here's the FX3. I mean, it just looks gorgeous. The window has full detail, really nice color, really smooth. This was shot in S-Log 24p. Just really surprised at how amazing it looks and feels. Once again, here's the FX6. You can see the difference between the 3 and the 6. It's so subtle. I'm going to say it's exactly the same. It just depends on the type of camera you want to shoot with, but it's really impressive. Next, we're looking at the RED Raptor. This kind of blew me away. It has such a cinematic feel. There was so much more space in terms of highlight to shadow than there was on the Sony. I mean, you're really it's at least 3 more stops worth of usable range. Going outside, here we are on the FX3. We had a spot mark for Eve to walk into focus, and beautiful. Look at the range. The highlight to shadow is incredible. But once again, the RED is just a little bit more cinematic. It has better color and just a better feeling overall. So this is a really difficult shot, massive backlighting, just, ambient light, really nothing on the front to help define the subject. The FX3 does a good job, but the RED is just absolutely spectacular in this situation. All right, so in conclusion, but first, I want to send a big shout out and a big thanks to my friend StevenHe for letting me borrow his RED Raptor camera. If you don't know Steven, he's here on YouTube and on TikTok. Very, very, very funny. Check out his videos. Again, Steven, thank you for letting me use your camera. So what do I think? First off, I think, as I said in the beginning, that the FX3 and the FX6 are very similar cameras. The color palette, the tonality, everything about it, it's very similar. And that's why I actually stopped testing with the FX6. I like the 3 better than the 6. The 6 has some different tools that might be helpful to some filmmakers, but for me, as a run and gun camera, still give me the FX3. In terms of color, I think the RED is one of the nicest color palettes I've seen. In terms of headspace, in terms of how much I could manipulate the file in DaVinci Resolve, the RED's hard to beat. You know, the highlights on some of the stuff from the FX3 and from the FX6 was a little compressed, a little crunched, whereas on the RED there was just a tremendous amount of room. Also because it's 8K, I had the ability of zooming in if I wanted to, literally 50%, and the quality was still nicer looking than the Sony was, even at its native 100%. One place where the RED was not as good as the Sony was in terms of autofocus. This has got good autofocus, but it's not great. This is just in a whole different league. Autofocus, tracking, it's just nicer on the Sony kit. Once again, run and gun, you know, more of a dedicated, you know, 1 or 2 or even 3 people operating camera system. In terms of where does this fit in terms of the hybrid workflow and the hybrid photographer, or in this case, the hybrid filmmaker? You know, we all are excited to see all these movies that are coming out now on film. You know, Nolan's always making movies on film, Tarantino. You know, there's an abundance of producers, directors, and cinematographers out there wanting to work on film. One of my favorite movies, The Lighthouse. I mean, I love that movie. It was all shot on XX. What's interesting though is that very rarely do we have the luxury and just the ability to see an actual film projection. 99.999% of the time you see a movie that was shot on film, you're seeing a digital projection, which is the hybrid workflow, film digital. A lot of times, you know, when The Hateful Eight came out by Tarantino, I drove 3.5 hours to Boston to go see a 70mm projection of it. Was it worth it? Yes. It was amazing, but that's not something I can do every day. So we're experiencing movies made on film in a hybrid workflow. Additionally, the movie DUNE that just came out. By the way, if you haven't seen DUNE, it's fantastic. If you're like me and saw the original DUNE back in the 80s, which made absolutely no sense, this movie's fantastic. It's beautiful, well done. I can't wait for part 2. And it was all shot on Alexa. And then portions of it, I believe, or I might not think all of it, but a good chunk of it was then dumped down to 35mm film and then rescanned. What's that? That's the hybrid process. That's having the best of film and the best of digital and mixing it up to get the color palette, the tonality, the grain structure, all of the things that you want that film to look like. So where does film fit in, you know, for you and I, you know, primarily still shooters? For me, I like to document my work excessively. I mean, I'm all into documenting even when we're making a particular artwork. Sometimes I use the camera that I'm filming this with right now, which is my iPhone 13 Pro Max. It's okay. Sometimes I'll film it with the FX3. You know, it just depends what I want. But I think documenting your practice is a really great way to also communicate with your collectors and people who are interested in your work. It's one thing to post a still image on the internet. It's another thing to post a still image and then maybe zoom into it, maybe have a little voiceover, and share like a little 60 seconds of what was going through your head when you made this piece. I'm seeing that as a better way for us to be able to share our still images on platforms like social media that really reward video. Thank you very much for listening. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Now go shoot some film.